if you're in the witness protection program, so trying to move to the back part of the room. So we don't want to out anyone. So,
Right.
welcome. I'm excited we're here to talk about Paradise. And I've already said it 3 times, but I'm so impressed that you all are here on Spring Forward Sunday to talk about Dante. So that's why you get treats, because you've gotten here. Well done, everybody.
Right.
So, and I'm gonna try to not knock anything off. I'm actually gonna move my phone, so there's one less opportunity. And I believe I know you all, but for the recording, my name's Laura, and I'm doing this just because I started reading Dante a few years ago, and Deacon Jeremiah invited me to just sort of shepherd us through this, so I am not an expert, but I've become a reader of Dante, as people who dip into Dante kind of find themselves drawn in. So a lot of the resources I'm referring, or have found helpful, are from other people who've just become readers of Dante. The other thing I've been spending time with leading up to Lent is the Rule of St. Benedict, and for other reasons, just kind of like, how do we do life in community? And this document has stood the test of time. One of the recommendations St. Benedict has for Lent is that everybody get a book out of the library, read through the whole thing, and just finish it as a Lenten discipline. So I know Paradise can be the most challenging part of this long poem, but to approach it as something that you're just determined to walk through and finish will pay dividends, just because getting to the end has its own value on this. St. Benedict also recommends that the elder monks go around the monastery at reading time and make sure people are reading and not snoozing, and bonk them on the head if they are not reading. We're going to dispense with that part. But just to embrace this as something that has some difficulty to it, is a little bit of a challenging book to get through in certain ways for reasons we'll talk about, but is worth finishing and seeing that completion of Dante's vision. And in light of my conversation with Pam a few minutes ago, I was just thinking of 1 Corinthians 2, verse 9. But as it is written, what no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love him. These things God has revealed to us through the Spirit. For the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. So what no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love him, these things God has revealed to us through the Spirit. For the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. So with this portion of Dante's story, he knows he's pressing into things that are going to surpass what he can really embrace and grasp with his own imagination and with his words. So he's inviting us further up and further into that space where we don't know. We can't be certain, but the Spirit prompts and nudges us to imagine and to press into those depths of God. So before we dive into the details on Paradise, doing my swipe right to left. So let's think back a little bit to what we've already gone through. So if you think back to reading Inferno, if you had to sum up in a sentence for someone what you took away from Inferno, or what it's meant for you, or something that stayed with you, just say in a sentence something that's been important to you for what you remember from Dante's journey through hell. Yes?
I would say hell is getting what you want.
Good.
Sin as a sin against love, and so evil can't create anything new, it can simply distort the good. So hunger's great, gluttony's a problem, sex is fantastic, lust is a problem, and so the way it distorts the things that are inherently good in human is great.
And sin distorts us and transforms us in ways that degrade us from what God intended us to be.
Yeah.
It's just a continuation of what people developed in their life here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, natural consequences. Yeah. I said, what I was thinking about this week is that the core of hell is ice, not fire, and that frozen isolation and turning inward on the self. Yeah. Good. And then if we think about purgatory, so once Dante's come up out of hell, and we spent the fall season, reading his journey of his imagination of what Mount Purgatory might be like. How would you describe in a sentence what you took away from your reading through Purgatory?
The time that we have absolutely matters and is really significant.
Yes, yeah.
Don't lose time.
Purgatory's time and it matters. Yes.
The Christian journey isn't passive. We work out our faith with fear and trembling.
Yeah.
It's a hallmark of that.
Yes. Yeah. Active engagement. Other sentences for Purgatory. I think the one that I remind myself as I go through life is that the rule of Purgatory is courtesy. So in the interactions between people, Dante's just showing again and again how the contrast between the experience in hell and the formative experience in Purgatory is that courtesy to one another as we go through those formative discomforts. So as we head into Paradise, how many of you have at least tried to read Paradise at some time in the past? Scattering of hands. How many of you have found it difficult to read Paradise at some time in the past?
That's where I stopped.
Yeah, exactly. And it's famously a hard book to get through. And so what I'd like to think about for the rest of our time today are the tools that we need as readers to be able to follow Dante into Paradise. So I want to look at a couple things, how the genre shifts as we move into this third section. So what he's doing with the genre and how his worldview is informing that genre shift, and then the important role that Beatrice has in Paradise, where she really comes to the fore. So Dante tells us to buckle up. So Canto 2, at the beginning of Paradise, he warns his readers, says, "O you that follow in light cockle shells, for the song's sake, my ship that sails before, carving her course and singing as she sails, turn back and seek the safety of the shore. Tempt not the deep, lest, losing unawares me and yourselves, you come to port no more. Oceans as yet undared my vessel dares, Apollo steers, Minerva lends the breeze, and the 9 muses point me to the bears. But you rare souls that have reached up to seize betimes the bread of angels, food for men to live on here, whereof no surfeit is, you may commit your bark unto the main, hard on my keel, where ridge and furrow flee, ere the vexed waters level out again." So he's just saying, if you're a casual reader, you might want to stop here because you're going to get lost in the cosmos if you're not serious about it. But if you are a serious reader, let's go. So there's value, there's this heavenly food that if you're hungry to know more of God and willing to venture into this space of imagining the wonders of God's creation in heaven, let's go. So I think the essence of a dare is to incite action rather than non-participation. So I think he's daring us to venture into the depths in hopes that we will proceed with him. So my approach to Paradise is that it is science fiction. So Dante's taking everything that the current understanding of how the cosmos is structured, he's saying, let's go on a journey and see what would it be like to travel through this. So there's been some of that element of the fantastical journey with going down to hell and purgatory as that motif of the epic journey through places that we believe exist but can't yet get to. So it's the Jules Verne journey to the center of the earth and the 20,000 leagues under the sea. Like, well, if we had this technology and we could do it, what would it be like to go there? And he's really taking that to a next level with heading off into the cosmos. I know we have science fiction readers and lovers in the room. If we're approaching a piece of literature or a creative work that we are perceiving as science fiction, how does that shape the way that we read or engage with that creative work?
You try to get the rules
Mhm.
that they're following, which don't necessarily have anything to do with your life.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if rules, is but, you know, like the way that science, that mechanics work, for instance.
Exactly.
You know, in a science fiction story is different. You know,
Yes.
like, cause the Enterprise can go. all
It can
over the
go,
places.
yes. So some of that suspension of disbelief. So some, like, okay, rules of physics, things might bend a little. And so just understanding what are the realities in this world and how's this gonna work. And I really think that Star Trek is the best model for like, well, what kind of work of literature is Paradise? Because they're just traveling through the universe to see what's out there. And each episode they kind of get to a new place, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on this because I'm not a big Trekkie, but they get to a new place and they stop and like, oh, here's this new planet, and they send some people down, they kind of beam down. How does that work? It just works. How does that work? It just works. And they put on their little red shirts and they go down, and the guy with the red shirt's gonna get killed, so don't get too attached to him. And then things are gonna happen and they're gonna figure out what's happening on this planet, and there's gonna be some lesson about some social value, like, ooh, these people are addicted to this substance. Maybe that's not good for them. Maybe we should help them get unaddicted. Or these people have these little rodents that are taking over their planet. Maybe these rodents shouldn't multiply too much, and if they come back on the Enterprise, then we'll be the little fuzzy things.
Tribbles.
Yeah,
The
tribbles.
tribbles.
So each little episode, they stop, they observe what's there, they learn something that's going to inform them about some truth about life for people in the universe. And then they beam back up and they get back on the ship, and like 99% of the time it works. I hear there's one where there's a little glitch and they had to figure that out. And then they go on to the next place. And then the next episode you're gonna have another stop and another exploration and another little lesson, and then you go on to the next one. So that's the kind of structure we're gonna see in Paradise, where Dante's just moving through the understanding of how the physical space of the universe will be structured, and seeing what he can see and what he can learn from it. So some of that, the suspension of disbelief is important, and then understanding what the model is that he's working through is going to be key. So we need to just look at what is Dante's model of the universe. It's the Ptolemaic universe that is geocentric. So the understanding was like, well, the Earth's going to be in the middle. If we consider that we're the middle, and then we need to account for all the observable data, what is planetary motion going to look like? And the understanding was that it was very large. C.S. Lewis, in his discussion of the medieval model, says at a walking pace, it would take you 8,000 years to get to the edge if you did like 40 miles a day, which is a pretty good walking pace. So it's huge, but it does have an outer limit. And with the Earth at the center, the organizing construct is height, that everything is up. There's nowhere to go but up from the Earth. One of the modern critiques of the medieval model is like, oh, well, they must have thought Earth was most important because they placed it at the center. But that really wasn't the case. They were perceiving Earth as the lowest thing, and everything else was higher than Earth. So there's really nowhere to go but up as you move out into God's universe. The challenge with making the mathematical model work is that if you're going to account for planetary motion with the Earth in the middle, the planets have to do all these little curlicues.
Yes.
So you can go on YouTube and watch what it would look like for the planets to be spinning around the Earth, and like, oh, look, the sun doesn't do any curlicues. Interesting. So there are reasons why, as they got more and more data and the model became increasingly fussy and complex, there was a reason to say, let's try it with the sun in the middle. So our model has shifted, but we still are making the best guesses we can with the data we have. So things like dark matter and dark energy, like 95% of the stuff that we think is out there, we have to assume it's there because otherwise the motion we see doesn't make sense. We can't really identify what that stuff is. We can't see it, taste it, touch it. So we're still working with these guesses based on observable data. So C.S. Lewis, in describing this, gives some of those details and then says, these facts are in themselves curiosities of mediocre interest. They become valuable only insofar as they enable us to enter more fully into the consciousness of our ancestors by realizing how such a universe must have affected those who believe in it. The recipe for such a realization is not the study of books. You must go out on a starry night and walk about for half an hour, trying to see the sky in terms of the old cosmology. Remember that you now have an absolute up and down. The earth is really the center, really the lowest place. Movement to it from whatever direction is downward movement. As a modern, you located the stars at a great distance. For distance, you now must substitute that very special and far less abstract sort of distance, which we call height. Height, which speaks immediately to our muscles and nerves. The medieval model is vertiginous. And I actually tried this, so I was reading through Paradise during COVID when there was nothing to do but go for walks, and I live in Redmond on the top of Education Hill. And I'd go out at night, and after like reading through Dante's visit to like this planet and that planet, I'd find it like, oh, there's Mars. Oh, that's where that is its ancestor who was in the Crusades. Oh, there's Venus. Oh yeah, I remember we talked to in Venus. And then you feel this sense of the verticality and like, wow, ooh, you could, like that the peril of falling feels real. So just that sense of height, and once you kind of make friends with what Dante's visited out there, you feel like you're in this neighborhood of a community of the planets out there. So really, there's a different way of being located when you have this kind of a conceptual model for the universe we live in. And C.S. Lewis admits, like, you know what, we don't any longer think this is the best explanation. We don't think it's true, like, this is the most accurate description, but it's still beautiful. And it's still a lovely way to think about how realities in the universe are ordered in relationship to one another. So the structure of the Ptolemaic universe, Earth is the lowest thing, and then they were believing that there had to be something holding the planets as they moved around. So what they were positing instead of dark matter was the ether, these crystalline spheres. You can't see them, but they're carrying the planets in these concentric rotating spheres around the Earth. And then outside all these wheeling spheres that have the planets, then the fixed stars that would be outside our galaxy were perceived to be beyond that. And then beyond that kind of 8,000 miles, 8,000 years of walking edge, beyond that limit, then God just fills everything out there. So the infinite space is the presence of God that's really beyond space and beyond time, and not limited by our 4 dimensions for the time-space continuum. And then the little chart here is similar to the handout I gave you. So this is the fold-out chart that's in the back of the Dorothy Sayers Penguin edition, which is our version that I recommend for the notes and the supporting materials. It's also a good translation. There are other translations that are also very readable, but Dorothy Sayers' notes are super helpful. And then in the back of the original publication of Paradise, there is this fold-out chart that was too big to fit on one of the pages that shows the ordering of the cosmos. And then on the back, she's got a handy-dandy chart that just sums up what Dante's visiting and seeing and learning at each level, which is really helpful for orienting the structure of the story. So the way Dante's organized this, as he's stopping to visit on the moon and each of the planets, there's a theme based on what the medieval concept was of what the influence of that planet was. So just the idea that, don't completely control, but the heavenly bodies have an influence on what's going on in worldly affairs. So he's organizing his characters on each planet according to that. So he first gets to the moon, and because the moon has its phases, it's associated with changeability or a lack of constancy. So he's meeting people there who in their lifetime fail to be faithful or constant to some of their commitments. And they're speaking to like, well, now that we're in paradise, how is this made right or made whole or made complete? And we're at peace with the outcome of our life, even though we made some mistakes. Similarly, the next step up on Mercury is all about ambition and that kind of striving for power and control. And so he's meeting people there who were trying to be in control, made some mistakes, and now are brought to a place where those things are made right. And on Venus, that's associated with human passion, he's meeting people like Rahab, who like, oh, she was the prostitute who rescued the spies. So kind of the like, oh, this person who had some complicated issues in their life, but God redeemed that. And so showing how, again, things made right. The next level is where the sun would fall in the ordering. And once we've passed those first 3 stops, then we're at the limit of the spot where the shadow cast by the sun, the shadow of Earth cast by the sun would reach out a certain distance into space. And so once we get to the sun itself, we've passed that point where the shadow of Earth would touch. When we get to the sun, Dante goes through all of these leading thinkers in the church, and they're kind of arranged in a circle dance. So he has people aligned in rows who are from all the different kind of tribal, factional positions in the church, and he puts them next to each other on a continuum, but they're in a circle. So at the end, you get the guys who would be most opposed to each other, standing in the circle next to each other. And they're all kind of speaking about one another. So like the Franciscans and the Dominicans are saying, well, these are the really good things the Dominicans did. And the Franciscans are saying, or the Franciscans are saying, these are the good things the Dominicans did. And the Dominicans are saying, these are the good things the Franciscans did, and commending one another. So he's got like 2 rows of guys in the circle dance, and it's all these names. It's really worth digging into Dorothy Sayers' notes to see who those people are and how Dante is showing, okay, once everyone's in heaven, all these controversies we're having on earth, we're gonna find a way to be in the kingdom together. And here's an idea of how these people could be at peace with one another in heaven. And it's really lovely and really speaks to our time. And then once moving up from there, then he's revisiting these same themes of fortitude, justice, and temperance, but people who are exemplary in those qualities. So Mars, the warrior planet, gets to meet his ancestor who was on the Crusades. He's like, oh, Cachuguita, I heard about you. You're my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. I'm so excited to meet you. Cachuguita is like, oh, my descendant, I'm happy to meet you. And they have this little interaction, and it's very sweet. And he knows he's in Mars because everything's red, and then he moves up to Jupiter, and then it's not red anymore. In Jupiter, he's meeting people who were exemplary in leaders in establishing justice on Earth. And then the last planet, Saturn, where everything's calm and chill, is the example of temperance, and he's meeting the contemplative people there. So he's just, each level, there's kind of a virtue and a story and someone he meets, and then he goes on to the next one. So just looking at this whole structure and the whole story of everyone he's meeting and how they fit together, I think the overarching question of Paradise is, if we pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, how is God's will done in heaven? So we're in this now and not yet space on earth. But in heaven, right now, God's will is being done perfectly. And all these people he's meeting, they're waiting for the resurrection. They don't yet have their resurrected bodies. So once he gets past the moon, he doesn't see any human figures. He just sees people as kind of these glowing envelopes of light, or like little dots of light, which, keep in mind, he lived in a pre-electric era. So as you read this, and he does these amazing visual representation of glowing dots of light, and how in the Jupiter, like the souls are acting like little pixels, like they're doing an LED display and making this eagle, and the eagle talks about justice, but the dots that are making up the image of the eagle are the people in there, and they're like doing this little dance. So he's got this amazing imagination of what it might look like, but really he's just trying to say, when God's will really is established, and the people who finish their lives are in heaven just enjoying God's will being done, what will that look like? And it's beautiful. I think one of the criticisms of Paradise is that there isn't conflict, but these people are speaking to how conflict has been resolved and how they've arrived at a place of peace after coming through conflict. This artwork is interesting because this piece was created about 60, 70 years after Dante published the Commedia. And here, rather than having the spheres arcing around the earth, the spheres are arcing up so that everything is revolving around God. And that's going to be Dante's insight. So in a minute we'll get to like, oh, what happens at the end? But his existing model, the spheres were concentric around the earth, but he's going to see that everything really revolves around God. So some of the nuts and bolts. Dante's on a journey through space. How does he move through the heavens? So Beatrice is his guide. Beatrice, who's been his kind of his inspiration for this whole journey toward God, into as human love as the conduit that lets us find our way to God's love. So Beatrice is now his guide through the heavens. They've gotten up to the garden at the top of Purgatory, and he doesn't even really realize what's happening at first, but when he gazes into her eyes, he's like, oh, she's so beautiful. She just became more beautiful. Like each time he looks at her and realizes she's become more beautiful, they've leveled up to the next level. So like, oh, now we're on the moon. Oh, now we're on Mercury. Oh, now we're on Venus. So each time he kind of stops and looks at her, they jump up to the next level. Beam me up, Scotty. How does it work? It just works. Don't ask too many questions. And you'll kind of forget that he needs oxygen. Like, of course, they're moving through the heavens and talking to people. So oxygen, air pressure, it just works. So they can do this. We don't know how. The figure of Beatrice becomes increasingly important here. So, and we've heard about Beatrice from the beginning, when he was lost in the dark wood, and Beatrice had asked Virgil to go down and be his guide. So who's this person, Beatrice? And there's really 3 levels to her character. So she was a real person. So when Dante was a kid growing up in Florence, when he was 9 years old, his dad took him for a May Day party to a neighbor's house. That neighbor had a daughter. Her name's actually Bice Portinari. She was 8 years old, and she was wearing a red dress, and she was this nice little girl. And Dante met her and saw her, and they thought, oh, I'm done. I'm cooked. Like this, this love is going to overrule me. Like he just sort of instantly fell in love with this little brown-eyed girl, and this was this organizing passion for the rest of his life. And we don't really know how much they interacted. Their families might have had like a country house next to each other up in the hills of Fiesole. But his first poetic work, La Vita Nuova, he's writing these poems about his experience of kind of having a crush on Beatrice all through his teens, and the limited interaction they have as he do with a crush, like, oh, he said hi. Oh, I saw her. So it's like, okay, I remember this from junior high. So when they're in their teens, there's a day where he's walking down the street and she's walking along with her friends and she says hello, and he's like, oh, my life has changed. But then he's commenting on like, well, what is it about her that's so remarkable? And he's describing her humility and how, like, when attention was given to her, other women would just kind of bask in the glow. And there was this commanding presence, but this humility where like she was almost invisible, and just the radiance of her gracious spirit and personality shone through. So like, okay, I kind of get that, like just a very gracious, lovely person. And I think of Father Bruce. When you talk to Father Bruce, he is almost invisible because his presence and his spirit is so radiant. You're not like, the outward appearance of Father Bruce isn't what matters, it's that radiant soul. So we know people like that. Usually not in their teens. It's usually people who've, lived, but there's something remarkable about her, that she just had that kind of presence that draws you into God's love as you talk with that person. And so in the Vita Nuova, he's writing these poems and then commenting on them. And then he didn't want people to know he had a crush on her, so he pretended to like another girl, and she was like, what are you doing? And then ignored him, and he was crushed. And then he was at a party, and he was so like flustered in her presence that he couldn't even sit and like eat his dinner, and she and her girlfriends were laughing at him for being nervous. And so there was this real person dimension to it. So she's this lovely young woman, but she also teases him and ignores him when he's behaving badly, and kind of puts him in his own place. They never really were in a relationship, what we would consider a relationship. Her family married her to someone else. She died. Dante was crushed. His family decided, well, we better find a wife for you so you won't be so sad. And he decided to dedicate the rest of his life to writing a poem worthy of Beatrice's memory. After she died, he got into studying philosophy, like, well, maybe this will give meaning and purpose to my life. And that deep dive on philosophy was the dark wood he found himself in at the beginning of the Commedia. So he was involved in Florentine politics, a leader in the community, a mayor. So he's kind of at the peak of his success and trying to write these very smart poems that would make other people feel stupid and explain philosophy, and then realized, I'm on the wrong path. So the point in his life where he starts writing the Commedia, Beatrice has died decades before, but his experience of observing her and just loving the person she was and feeling drawn into God's love by seeing the goodness in her life has been this organizing and defining part of his life. So she moved from being this real person, this little girl in Florence and the teenage young woman, to this image of the human love that points us toward God's love. And then moving into the Commedia, she really becomes an icon where what we're seeing in the human is everything is directing us. You really need to pay attention to God. You really need to pay attention to what's happening with God's kingdom. So as they move up through paradise, Beatrice will keep saying, why are you still looking at me? He's like, well, you just got more beautiful and we moved to a new planet. She's like, yes, but you need to pay attention to the people you can talk to here. Like, yes, you want to know about love. You should probably talk to Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. He can teach you a great deal about love. You want to know about love, you should speak with the Apostle John, who can tell you all about love. Rather than looking at me, you need to be looking at God, because we're going to get to that outer edge and you're going to have a glimpse of God. Be looking at that. So she keeps kind of redirecting his vision up and out and toward God. So that's in Dante's comment on like, well, what is the value of human relationships and how do we come to understand love? It's that being in relationship with one another in a way that directs our vision and our gaze up and outward to God. So Beatrice has multi-levels, the real person, the imagined person, and it's all kind of mashed together where he's creating a character from someone who he really knew, but then taking her to a very different level. So by the time we get to Paradise, she's got a lot of lines. She knows, she's been in heaven for a couple decades, so she knows a lot, but she's still this teenage young woman in her presence in the story. So she's smart, she has lines, she knows about science. This is a work of science fiction, so she's going to do a lot of digressions on like science experiments and this and that and principles of physics and light and mirrors, and Dante's just exploring everything that's interesting about science in his day, and he gives Beatrice the talking points on that. She knows about science, and she understands the theology of Thomas Aquinas. So she's going to be instructing him in points of theology all the way through. So this middle-aged man going through the universe getting instructed by the teenage girl. And why is that surprising? It's a little surprising in our day. Like, people complain about Beatrice being too know-it-all and bossy. Like, why is she still talking? Which they don't complain about Virgil being a know-it-all and bossy. Because Virgil kind of instructs Dante a lot, but no one's like, oh my gosh, Virgil shouldn't be talking so much. But Beatrice, she has a lot of lines. Dante's doing something really unusual in this work. So there's a literary genre of courtly love that was the background he was writing against. C.S. Lewis talks about this in one of his key scholarly works, The Allegory of Love, published in 1936, which I have not read, but I have Googled and heard about. Just like, oh yeah, C.S. Lewis talked about that. So Lewis explores how the 11th century French Provençal poets, so about 300 years before Dante, created this literary genre of courtly love. And it's the concept of unattainable, idealized fair ladies, inspiring devotion from knights who pursue quests. Kaylee knows a little bit about knights and quests. So all of our Camelot stories fit in this genre. The interesting thing is that the fair ladies don't actually say or do much. They're just kind of there. So they're the inspiring figure, like, tie her banner on your arm and go out and fight the joust, and she watches. She doesn't really do much. It doesn't matter what she thinks. She just has to be there and be lovely and beautiful and gracious. Beatrice is really different. So Dante's respinning this concept of courtly love where Beatrice has a mind and a heart and opinions and authority. She scolds him, she corrects him, and then she's constantly redirecting his gaze upward and outward toward the greater saints, the apostles, and God. So she is forming the way he pursues his quest. So she's important. She's going to tell you some stuff about medieval science. But all of that journey is moving toward the final canto. When they get up to this outer edge, in this chart, the last point on here is the Empyrean. It looks like a little rose. It's kind of like a stadium seating. So all the people in heaven, they've got a seat up here, but then they also have a planet they're associated with, so they can kind of bilocate. So the last level, we get up to the Empyrean, Beatrice goes and sits down in her seat, her assigned seat in the heavens, like, aisle 37. And she's like, okay, Bernard of Clairvaux is going to take you from here. And so Dante gets up to this final level where we're out at the outer edge, and he's seeing these concentric circles of angels spinning and spinning around this point of light that is God. So he doesn't see an old man on a throne, like in the art. The universe really flips inside out, because the image of the rotating spheres concentric around the earth, the outer one would have to spin the fastest, so that because everything has to go around in one day. So you've got these spinning spheres that are going faster and faster toward the outside. And then as he gets up to the outer edge and sees God, he's seeing God as a tiny point of light with concentric circles of angels moving inward. So the more powerful ranges of angels move inward. And the inner circle goes the fastest. So it's like our model of planetary motion. So everything flips. And he's like, wow, my mind is blown. And all the way through that last canto, he's saying, my words are not sufficient to describe what I'm seeing. Wow, everything is pulling in toward God as the central presence that's drawing us all in. And he speaks of the love that moves the sun and other stars. And the concept of the planetary motion in this model is that what's making things move is that everything wants to get closer to God. So the spinning spheres are trying to strive to get toward God. Everything's pulling upward toward God. And he has this image of like, well, what is that shape I'm seeing there? And he kind of sees these three overlapping spheres, so kind of this giant Venn diagram, sort of like the way we would draw the symbol of the Trinity, but in 3 dimensions. And then one of them has this sort of the human image on it. So he's kind of trying to grasp the Trinity as this sort of abstract, 3-dimensional, bright, overlapping sphere. Every time I read it, I'm like, okay, this time I'm going to get what he's saying. And it's beautiful. You kind of have to let it just expand your mind and say, okay, I didn't quite grasp it, and then read it again. But the whole point is that Dante's realizing God is really at the center of all things. God's outside and around everything, but he's at the center. And it's worth just getting to that end, because that's the whole point of this whole journey. That everything Dante's seen along the way is that the only thing that matters is drawing nearer to that presence of God. And I can't describe it, I can't explain it, but this is what I glimpsed. Let me tell you what I can, and then we're going to be done, because we got to Canto 33, and that's how far we get to go. So these are the resources we have. There's a lot of resources online, so as you go along, you're like, oh, this is complex, I'm a little overwhelmed. An excellent resource, there's a website put out by Columbia University, digitaldante.columbia.edu, that has several translations. It's got commentary on each one, so you can go in and look up the canto you're on and find resources there. During COVID, Baylor College put out a series of videos, 100 Days of Dante. They're each about 10 minutes. I listened through all the ones on Paradiso while I was cleaning my bathroom and dusting my living room. And they're excellent, so you can kind of take those one at a time, or you can listen through the whole thing and get an overview. As Dante goes through each part of Inferno, Purgatory, and Paradise, there's parallels across those. So if you're stuck on a canto, it doesn't hurt to look back at the equivalent cantos in Inferno and purgatory for what is referred to as vertical reading, looking for thinking of each of the cantos in parallel, what are the cross-cutting ties between them. I do recommend audiobooks, so if you're stuck, just put it on, let it play. There's an excellent translation by Robin Kirkpatrick that's available on Audible. The John Ciardi translation is also excellent and very listenable. So I'd encourage you just to commit to getting through it so you get to that glimpse of God at the end. Because after we read this, I'd like to sit down with all of you and see, how did that look to you? Because I still have to read it again and again and say, I don't think I've quite got my mind wrapped around exactly how Dante's seeing this, but I want to understand it better. And each time I read it, I get another kind of dimension of, oh, this is what he's imagining and what it might look like. So that said, let's press further up and further in. Does anyone have comments, questions?
Logistically, tell them when the luncheon is.
Yes, thank you. Yes. So the other resource we have for you is this handy dandy bookmark. So if we start tomorrow and read a canto a day, that'll have us finish before Palm Sunday. And so then we'd have a little hiatus, Palm Sunday, Easter week. So if you've got some slippage, there's time to catch up. And then the Sunday after Easter, which is April 27th, we will do another lunch after church. So whether you mostly finished, partly finished, just read some, just come and we'll talk about Paradise. Because I found one of the best ways to find your way into Dante is to listen to what other people have gotten out of Dante and then go back and read it some more another day. So, yes.
I wish I had this lecture when I first had to go. It stirs in my imagination a fresh reminder that the medieval imagination is so hierarchical. Like that's how they see the world. And even the slides you showed just showed hierarchy after hierarchy. That alignment with God is knowing your place and being in the right, everything in its right place. And that sin and evil distorts that and suddenly disrupts the right ordering of the cosmos of God's heavenly kingdom. The other thing I just want to observe is that poets throughout the centuries really struggle with the idea of perfection. How do I show that without it becoming static, right? Because we know, like, drama is through conflict. Stuff happens, like it's slapped in the face, and that leads to this other thing that happens, and it's kinetic. And so Dante isn't alone in this. I think Milton is the same. Book 4, you couldn't pay me money to read Book 4 of Paradise Lost again. It's so dull in heaven because it's just nothing happens. There's no drama. But I think Dante, I admire him so much because unlike so many other poets, I think the conceit he uses of light and of glory, and to think of Paradise as this infinite dimmer switch, that it's just glory after glory after glory after glory ad infinitum. Like it just keeps going. His apprehension of not just Beatrice's beauty, but the beauty of God, I think is a work of genius. I mean,
and one of my favorite moments, like there's this little handy dandy ladder here on the chart, because of course there's going to be a ladder. So when you get to the top of the planets, you have to get up to the fixed stars. There's a little ladder they climb up. And when he gets up to the ladder, he stops and looks down. It's like, how do we get up here? And just that physical sense of the vertiginous. Like there's just these delightful little moments of like, oh, what would that be like to see that? So have your visual imagination turn on for that. And just one more tangent, and just kind of combing through my resources, I came across this lovely essay by C.S. Lewis on membership that I was reading along with my introduction to Dante. And he talks about precisely that, how we've lost the sense of a hierarchical order, but a healthy body is a hierarchy of different parts ordered in right relationship to one another, not the uniform, egalitarian, flat structure. So that's where we're observing all of the universe as a rightly ordered hierarchical body with diverse parts in harmonious relationship to one another. It's really beautiful. Right. Other questions, comments,
I
thoughts?
just have to say that I told Laura that I wasn't looking forward to this, but now I am.
Yay! Mission accomplished. Mission accomplished. Yeah, and just one more gratuitous comment. Purgatory is my favorite, but I found with Paradise, it's the one that I found is most rewards rereading. So if you're stuck and it's your first time through, count it your first read because the next one will be better, and it's worth coming back to it again. Yes.
So how many times have you read it?
So I read it. I read the Sayers edition during COVID, and I would read the canto. I'd read the notes, and I'd read the canto again. And then Deacon Jeremiah turned me on to the CRD edition, so I've read that. And then I've listened through the audiobook of the Kirkpatrick edition. And I've listened, I don't know if it counts, I've listened to the Italian on LibriVox twice. Because I wanted, before I read it in English, I wanted to hear how the Italian sounds.
That was probably very nice.
It's beautiful, and it goes fast, just flows.
So I glanced at the CRD edition, I read the Sayers edition.
Yeah.
And I thought the CRD, even though he didn't stay with the rhyming scheme exactly,
Right.
was a lot clearer to me.
Yeah.
But I'm sticking with the Sayers because of she holds with the original rhyming.
Yes, yeah, and there's really value in both. So really the best thing to do is to read several translations, because everyone has to make choices of what they keep and what they relinquish. But I think for the notes in the Sayers edition, I think are so important in Paradise to know who we're talking to and why it matters that Dante's meeting this people, and it really just unfolds a lot of value. So if you are reading CRD and check the notes from Sayers, I find CRD's notes miss a lot of the value that someone who is an Orthodox Christian sees in who these people are and how they're relating to one another.
However,
Yeah.
in the CRD edition on the Kindle, you can click on your notes and go
Ooh.
right to them, so you don't have to.
None of that flipping back and forth. That's a fun thing. So. Well, thank you all for your time. Unless someone else has a burning comment or thought, I think we will adjourn so we have time to transition, because we're going to do the Great Litany today for the story of Lent. So have more snacks, enjoy some more coffee.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Caffeinate, get ready.
Caffeinate.